Maritime Matters is brought to you live by Bahamas Maritime Connection.
What is maritime?
Maritime, simply put, relates to navigation or commerce on the high seas.
Some say money makes the world go round. I say ships move the money that make the world move.
Who navigates those large international ships?
How often are international ships required to be surveyed and inspected?
Maritime also protects our seas and borders by way of our local Bahamas Defense
It is
Force.
very sad to say that out of 1,500 plus ships that are registered under the Bahamian flag, only a very small amount of Bahamians are employed.
Maritime Matters.
Hey, guess what today is? Well, you know today is Tuesday. Oi! And it's time for Captain Glenn. Are you ready on? So everyone let's gather around. Cause Maritime Matters. He's a native of Andros. Say what? But he grew up in Nassau. Sail around the Bahamas, all around, with the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Hey! Well, you know today is Tuesday. Oh yeah. And it's time for Captain Glenn. Let's do any boy. So everyone let's gather around your radio. Cause Maritime Matters. Hey! Well, you know today is Tuesday. Say what? And it's time for Captain Glenn. So everyone let's gather. Cause Maritime Matters.
Matters. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, pleasant good evening to one, pleasant good evening to all. Welcome to Maritime Matters. We humbly apologize for our late start. Boy, I think this is the latest we ever start. I can tell my boy, made him gonna do better, but that's my dog. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a good show for you tonight. We got a short show because we may not make it all the way, but guess what? It's a really solid show. We're talking tonight about the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Yes, our beloved Royal Bahamas Defense Force. We're coming to you live via Love 97 FM studios. This is Tuesday, the 23rd day of June, 2026. And if it's a Tuesday, well, you know today is Tuesday. We know the deal. It's maritime. Tick, 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 tick. Matters. We encourage that if you're driving and tuning in with us, please do so cautiously. And ensure to take your time in getting wherever it is you are trying to get safely. As the saying goes, drive to arrive alive. Our sponsors for the night show, One-on-One Pharmacy and also Island Care Pharmacy up there in Freeport. We also got Bahamas Maritime Connection Limited. And number one fan, as always, my 93-year-old Auntie May up there in Freeport. Auntie May, what's happening, honey? Auntie May is with us tonight, people, as always. But here we go, tonight. Tonight, while we get so much going on in our, we could call it little world now, because we one little global village linked together by internet, communication, correspondence, social media, and the world ain't big like it used to seem. Like when I was a little boy, people talk about England, you're thinking, boy, that's like going to space. People talk about Australia, you're thinking, people talk about China, but you know, these places are extremely far. But technology has kind of caught us together so tightly that somebody could be in China and you're in the Bahamas and you just pick up the phone and you're talking to them like they're next door. That's technology. That's technology. And we thank God for that, eh? So, with all of the price of fuel skyrocketing, and we know why. It's all because some people decided they can create havoc in the Persian Gulf, an oil-rich area of the world where you got the wealthy countries that sell oil to all of us. And that Persian Gulf was taken out of sync due to a war going on between Israel, Iraq, and the United States. Of course, Israel and the United States are hand in hand. In Iraq, it's all by themselves. And on the other side of Iraq, because when they wreak havoc on Iraq, Iraq turns around and wreak havoc on the other side of the Persian Gulf. That would be Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, or United Arab Emirates. That's with a big time one named Dubai and one little further down. And then we also have Qatar, we have Kuwait, we have Bahrain, and who else? Iraq is up in the corner there somewhere. So Saudi Arabia, yeah, we got them all right there. And these are the countries that control over 20% of the world's fuel. And they sell. And we have, from that 20%, Iran is a part of it. But she lashes out at all those other countries in the region whenever she needs to try and defend herself. Because she knows that the United States have military bases. And she lashes out at those military bases. Very expensive stuff, radars and aircraft and that type of thing, eh? And the thing is, they're so open to Iran's attack. They can hardly defend themselves from all the bombardment of what Iran is sending at them, right? And Iran is bombarded all the time because there ain't nobody in the world, no other country in the world have more military might than the great USA. And so when they unleash, that is a rain of licks, blows, missiles coming on Iraq. And Iraq is so mountainous that they just go in those tunnels underneath the mountains and they just relax with all the noise on top of them. But the bombs cannot penetrate all the way down to the tunnels. And, Iran has a way of staving off the big punch or the big impact from all those missiles and drones and all those heavy bombers dropping those 5,000 pounders on top of the head and whatnot. So yeah, we got the war going on. And then it came to a resolution the other day when the bombing supposed to stop for 2 or 3 months. And then it didn't stop. Because while everybody else stopped, Israel didn't stop the bombardment of Lebanon. And so Iraq being an affiliate or affiliated with Lebanon and Gaza, so that area, with Hezbollah in particular, that caused them to say, look, we are now going to close the Straits of Hormuz again. Because they weaponized the maritime Strait of Hormuz. Weaponized it to the extent that no vessel could pass through there unless Iran agreed that we will not attack you. Because the vessel there's nobody that could protect them from being attacked by Iran if they're going to have to pass through the Gulf of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz. And the Strait of Hormuz is basically the entrance and exit to and from the Persian Gulf. So you can't get to Saudi Arabia's ports and Qatar and Kuwait and Bahrain and Iraq and the next one name Oman. You can't get to their ports in the Gulf, and most of their ports are in the Gulf. 90% of their ports are in the Gulf, right? Without passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And after Iran realized they could shut the whole Gulf down, I mean, they always knew the Strait of Hormuz, all vessels after. But I don't think until this war came about and ships, it was too dangerous for ships to come in and out of there, Iran realized that they could actually weaponize this Strait of Hormuz to cause the world to pay attention to them. Because what was happening, and we talked about this on the show before, right? What was happening there, listener, is China, the great country of China, country in the world, the country that is up and coming, was getting a lot of their oil from outside, from sources like Venezuela. Well, we know that was shut down by the Americans, and they could no longer get oil from Venezuela. And then they got, I think, the second largest quantity of oil from Iran. And then now Iran is shut down because the U.S. have a blockade saying they're only letting ships come in and out of the Strait of Hormuz that they allowed her to move through. And so they got a blockade on that. So China's no longer getting oil from Iran either. And then as a result, China had to find places to get oil from. And while you have another 80% of suppliers out there, China have plenty of money. So because China now need to find somewhere to get that 40% of oil that they were getting from Iran and from Venezuela, they actually tighten up the demand by getting them from places where countries like us were settling for outside of the Gulf, right? And then Russia is so popular now because the Russian gas that they had going through those pipelines, and that Europe was refusing because they had this war going on with Russia and Ukraine. That gas that Europe used to use, they had turned to the Gulf to get a lot of that, right? And they had turned to the US to get a lot of that. But now Russia is now being needed, because when other countries like us have now go to the US, some of the US gas that was going to Europe available like that, it's tightened up. And that's why the price of oil and gas in the world have escalated. Because while there's a lot of oil and gas in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf, it is unavailable because of this war. And until it becomes available again, the price will continue to go up. And the timing of all of this is very critical. Because right now the world is looking at renewable energy to a great extent. Right now the United Nations and the rest of the world, I'll say outside of the great USA, because the US isn't really particularly interested in renewable energy at this stage. Because President Donald Trump is saying that we got oil, we can sell it. We got oil, we can use it. We don't care what the rest of the world say. We're going to drill, baby, drill. Right? So, in the United States, the program for renewable energy has basically been shelved, been sidelined, because they had a program, and the program was pretty aggressive. They were bringing in a lot of they had contracts afoot to bring in a lot of wind farms to provide energy, and wind is natural. So the wind farms wouldn't need fuel. And then 28% of the world's energy is utilized by fossil fuel from to run cars, trucks, tractors, and whatnot, to run vehicles, right? Only 2% is used between ships and aircraft, some 3% in total. So that's a small amount for ships and aircraft compared to cars. And I always wondered how come, but cars, so many cars all over the world. Cars suck up like 27, 28% of the world's energy. So the cars have combustible engine. And a lot of cars today, right now, are replacing the need for energy from fuel by using what they call EVs or electric vehicles. These vehicles don't have no engine. These vehicles don't have no transmission. You don't need no transmission fluid. You don't need no engine oil. You don't need no gas. You don't need no kind of nothing like that, because they just have big battery that supplies the power. Now, you will charge your vehicle once a week if you don't run around much. But if you do a lot of runs, because you got plenty of pit stops to make, then of course you may have to charge twice a week. And when you charge that battery, you basically plug into the city grid, And that grid is fed by fuel, whether it's gas, whether it's natural gas, whether it's bunker C, whatever kind of fuel to run that to generate that power is what is fed to the electrical grid to charge the batteries in those cars. So while those cars are not going to the gas station for gas, those cars are still utilizing energy from gas, because for them to plug in and get power, the power is provided and supplied by gas, either natural gas, diesel, bunker C, one of them, right? Fuel. But the amount of fuel that it takes to charge that car is far less than the amount of money it would cost to go to the gas station and fill a tank. So yes, while today it costs some tapping in of regular energy to run the car from renewable energy. 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and even today in some places, they use solar for energy, for the electrical grid. They use wind farms to supply the electrical grid. So they're not using fossil fuel to supply the electrical grid in some spaces. And while they're not using fuel, you can still plug your car in and energize your battery from that grid that's being supplied by natural wind farms and / or solar. And so we looking at 10 years down the road. 10 years down the road. Because the United Nations, which is basically all the countries in the world coming together, have decided that we're going to wean this earth off of fossil fuel, off of anything to do with fuel, which include natural gas, which include bunker C, which include diesel, which include gas. We need them no more. Because they are causing trouble with their combustion by putting too much carbon in the environment. And this carbon is actually blocking the heat from getting off the earth at night when it's supposed to be going back into space. It's keeping it here, so when the sun comes the next day and heat it up again, it gets even hotter. And it's destabilizing the entire climate system. That's why now you see we have a lot of freaky weather. And if you all been around half the time, you know we got some freaky weather nowadays. It's in the middle of the winter and you get hot. Sometime in the middle of the summer, you get a cool night. You try and figure, well, how come it's cool and this is summer? Because the atmosphere is unstable. Because they got so much heat punching in, punching there, and ain't being able to get out. So and then you got the ice melting up in the poles and the glaciers coming apart, and so the ocean is gradually rising, and all kind of things going on, right? So to fix that, the United Nations decided, by way of the conference of the party, but COP 28 meeting, COP 23 meeting, COP 16, COP 30 something now, where they're talking about what they could do. And our government is deeply involved in these conference of the party meetings. So much so that while other countries were obligated to pledge what they're going to give up and how they're going to wean themselves off of this fuel dependency, by 2030, the Bahamas and all those other countries are required to reduce their dependency on fossil fuel by 30%. So what we was using, and I think they call this the Paris Agreement that happened in 2017 or something like that, right? Could be 2021, I don't know, but it happened some years back. And the government of the Bahamas at the time, actually the Prime Minister was the current Prime Minister who repeated as Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister Brave Davis, and pledged, I think this is 2021, shortly after he came in, pledged that our country would reduce by 30% by way of what government controls. And what does government control? Government controls the cars that government departments purchase for the sake of getting the job done. And he said that all of our cars will be EVs by 2030. We ain't purchasing nothing other than EVs. So by 2030, we should have nothing but no more combustible engine in the government system when it comes to vehicles. Or if they did, they were there before we made this pledge. We ain't going to buy no more after this pledge in 2021. And I don't know if that's happening, but I do know that I see a lot of red plates that are EVs. So I think that is, and to some extent, you have to realize that the fact that the PLP government repeated as the administration to run this country means that you now have continuity in that pledge. Because if the FNM had come in when we had elections, you know, the FNM may see it as, well, that's the PLP pledge. Although government is supposed to be continuous and they're supposed to be obligated on whatever was pledged to the world by the government in power at the time. That may have been a part of their argument why we now not doing all the things we pledged to do. But now we ain't got to worry about that, because the PLP government repeated. And so those pledges by 2030, next 4 years, should be realized. And another thing was pledged is all government buildings. And I know how much government I have, because you know government is rent plenty other people buildings. But as it may, all government owned buildings will be operating by solar. That's another pledge. So if you got all the buildings operating by solar and all the vehicles operating by batteries, then would that be enough? Not all the vehicles now, all the government-owned vehicles, all the government-owned buildings. I think that may not be enough to break it down by 30%. So in my opinion, what the government really should be looking at, and maybe they are, I don't know, when it comes to energy, is bringing in solar. Because we in the solar belt, we are deep in the solar belt. You know, we got sun year round. So we can have solar year round. Yeah, of course, there'll be times when we have hurricanes or when we have a lot of overcast and the solar may have some little challenges. But you could still have some booster generators and whatnot that you could just boost the battery within the the bank, the grid, within the electricity grid that runs our country. Well, it runs New Providence, which is the 80% of our energy for the country, eh? That grid will have a battery bank that is fed by solar farms. And it's also fed by all those government buildings. And it could be also fed by all of our homes. All of our houses have roof with solar panels can fit on, provided the government incentivizes us to put solar panels on our roof, so the government don't have to build too much solar farms, because now all of our roofs become part of the solar bank that can feed the grid. And you can incentivize us by saying, look, you get solar, you can reduce your electricity bill by 50% until you are fully solarized, or whatever the case may be, right? Or when you feed from the solar you get on your roof to the grid, we will give you full value for what is going into the grid. And then really nobody can need no additional power from the grid, because the grid will be fed with so much roof that when night comes, it should have enough in the storage batteries to give back for nighttime. But it's still got meters on everybody's house. So if you decide you want to run all your generators, your air conditioners in the night, and the fella, your neighbor, decide, boy, this night ain't that hot, I ain't running all my air conditioning, then he should pay less, just like it is now. But the type of meter you should have, once you grid tie or tie to the grid with your solar, when you're feeding power to the grid, in other words, your house then full, and you get excess power coming from your solar panels and they going into the grid, your meter turns backward, or turns the opposite way, because now you're feeding back. And all that reading throws off how much you could pay at the end of the day, because you have negative reading sometimes, you have positive reading, and when you get the sum of that, then that's all you will pay. And the government could incentivize, right, the actual purchasing of those solar panels that could help all of us, assisting with the purchasing of them, or just providing them or putting them on people's roof and utilizing them to feed the grid, instead of having something all the way out Clifton Pier. You have farms and farms of solar feeding a grid from out there, and then you gotta use the high voltage wires to bring all that stuff uptown. No man, our roof all over the place. So we feeding these various transformers right from within the area. So you even ain't need those transmission high voltage lines anymore to be in use to bring power from Clifton Pier uptown to where most of the homes and stuff are. Anyway, this show really shouldn't be about solar panels and the grids and incentivizing. I mean, that's all good stuff, you know, but I had to mention that because the war going on impacting the cost of fuel, and we say now we need to now speed up, because while we can't control the cost of fuel, we ain't gotta worry about what fuel costs if we go into solar, because the sun is free. If you put 1 or 2 windmills around the place, or windmill farms, because the wind is free. So we don't need wind farms because we don't have strong winds like some of those countries in the north, right? But we got a strong sun, and we get enough for solar to take care of us without having to worry about fuels and gas stations and those big tankers coming out Clifton Pier and that type of thing. Oh, they will all be a thing of the past. And guess what? In 2035 and onwards, they probably will be a thing of the past based on the trajectory of this renewable energy chart. It's very highly possible, and especially with this disturbance with this war in the Gulf, this will spur countries on to speed up the progress of renewable energy, because we realize now that energy is so vulnerable when it comes to fuel that some countries could cause the whole world to be in problems. And so, that said, I see no calls coming in. We just go to our first break. And when we come back, we get into the Defense Force. We want to talk about how the Defense Force was formed, why it was formed. We want to talk about what the whole purpose of the Defense Force was, and how it was set up to meet that, how the Defense Force is supposed to be the best little navy in the world, and even didn't reach halfway there because a lot of stupidness happened. We want to talk about but how it became Bahamianized, and who's responsible, and the training differences between officers and ratings, and what it's like today compared to what it was like yesterday, and if we could reverse some of this foolishness that are going on, like the nepotism, right, and the favoritism, we will have to dig Royal Bahamas Defense Force then, or yesterday versus today. Thank you so kindly. We shall be back right after the break.
At One-on-One Pharmacy, our friendly staff is ready to serve you. Visit us today for all your prescription and over-the-counter needs at our East Street South or Charles Saunders Highway locations. We're open Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and from 9 to 4 on Sundays. In a rush? Send your refill scripts online at oneononepharmacy.com or ask about our convenient pickup service. One-on-One Pharmacy, providing personal health care with people at heart. At Bahamas Maritime Connection Limited, we offer first-class maritime security services throughout the Bahamas and the wider Caribbean. As experts in maritime security, we specialize in production of ISPS assessments and plans, verification audits, certified familiarization training, and port security consultancy, just to name a few. Our services also include provision of a security force to maintain all required ISPS facility security compliance. For all your maritime security needs, visit us today in Nassau at our East Street South location or in Freeport in the Kipling building. Call us at 392-3515 or follow us on all social media platforms. Bahamas Maritime Connection, your leader in maritime security. Let's help you make the connection.
Hey, guess what today is? Well, you know today is Tuesday. Oi! And it's time for Captain Glenn. Are you ready on? So everyone, let's gather around, 'cause Maritime Matters. He's a native of Andros. Say what? But he grew up in Nassau. Sail around the Bahamas, all around, with the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Hey, well, you know today is Tuesday. Oh yeah, and it's time for Captain Glenn. Let's go, any boy. So everyone, let's gather around your radio, 'cause Maritime Matters. Hey, well, you know today is Tuesday. Say what? And it's time for Captain Glenn.
Well, you know today is Tuesday. Hey! That's what I'm talking about, CBS. And you know it's time for Captain Glenn with Maritime Matters. But look here, that Stevie S, he can make you feel good, eh? Boy, Stevie, thank you so much. Stevie S on the Maritime Matters. Little jingle, jingle, jingle. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to Maritime Tick, 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 Tick Matters. I am your host, Captain Glenn Bean. I'm joined in studio with my beautiful, my wonderful the producer of producers. I better know that Craig, give me, eh? Mr. Kishno Jones. We doing our thing here on a Tuesday. You know, it's Maritime Matters at 5:05. Well, we started late tonight, but we ain't worrying about that. We are moving on. Ladies and gentlemen, you listen to me talk Maritime. Maritime Matters is every week. Every Tuesday of every week at 17:05. That's 5:05 p.m. here on Love 97 FM. The primary purpose of our show is to sensitize Bahamians of opportunities in the maritime sector. We also cover current maritime issues from the domestic and international feeds. The phone that you wish to get in on the discussion during this show is 322-5477. So if you're on the defense force, if you used to be on the defense force, if you thought about being on the defense force, if your brother or your sister or your auntie or your uncle or your cousin or your son or your daughter was on the defense force, you want in on the show. And the number to call, 322-5477 or 322-5683. Because we're going to be shabby in the situation. That's what we can do tonight. We can shabby the situation. And I ain't going to ask the grand, right? Because you who want to defend, because I get offended in some ways, the situation, please feel free to call and let's chat. To hear a replay of this show or any other previous show that we put out there, simply hit us up at any time via our YouTube page. That's Maritime Matters Bahamas. Just go to YouTube on your electronic device and type into the search box Maritime Matters Bahamas, and you will see a litany of our shows show up, and you can pick, you can choose, you can refuse, but we still want you to listen to all. One at a time, whenever you get a chance. You will not be disappointed. So let's talk maritime. And we know our hot topic for the night, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, yesterday versus today. Let's get cracking. How it all began? Well, you know, before I even get started, I need to say that I was an officer of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force for 18 years, 13 years as a seagoing captain, and then I spent the next 5 years with the Port Department as a conman. So I have been in the force long enough, early enough, and at the early stage to understand how it all happened and how could we compare then to now. I'm not in there now. I haven't been in there for over 30 years, but guess what? I still know what's going on. I got people who in there who talk. Me and them talk. I got good friends in the defense force still. And I have good friends who used to be on the defense force. Once you was in the defense force, you always interested on what's going on. Are we doing our best? And we get very disappointed when foolishness go down. It's the same thing with most organizations. Talk to the people in Metelco. They like to know things still getting good, right? BPL, same thing. Police force, yes. They support and continue to support what is trying to be achieved by those organizations. So how it all began? We had somebody, a prime minister in this country called Sir Lyndon Oscar Pinley. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force, as they say, was his baby. Because when the idea was tossed about having a defense force, Sir Lyndon was viewed by many, because you know we all have detractors, and all the good that Sir Lyndon was doing in this country, including trying to bring on stream a Royal Bahamas Defense Force, because remember, shortly after independence, people say Pinley want an army to defend him, so he don't never get out of power. He will have a coup and keep the country. This is the foolishness people were saying back then. You know, the short-sightedness. And at the time, the problem, when you look at this decision in a vacuum, you might think all kind of foolishness. But when you look at it in the proximity of our region, particularly the Caribbean small states, we were basically next in line. Because Jamaica had a defense force many years ahead of us even bringing this idea up. Barbados had a defense force many years before Trinidad. So the three big ones. Well, I mean, we're supposed to be right up there with three. It was really four big ones, right? The Bahamas make four. And if you don't believe me, check the Carifta records. If you don't believe me, check the United Nations records. If you don't believe me, you go and you check the international scene and see which small island nations out of the Caribbean are the forerunners. And you'll always come up with Jamaica. Well, of course, they're the largest, and Jamaica normally on top of the game, right? Trinidad and Tobago, Bahamas, Barbados. It's always those four. And then you get some coming, bringing up the rear, like Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, St. Vincent here and there with some things. And then you got St. Kitts with certain things. And then so they're all there. But when you look at the top five, you'll always have those four as the top. And then if you think about airlines, you had, somebody mentioned this today, Bahamas Air, which was the Bahamas airline. We started off as Bahamas Airways. Then you had Air Jamaica, which doesn't exist now. But they were huge. And for a long time, Air Jamaica was reigning and doing things, doing their thing. And then you had I think his name was Liat, eh? You had Liat for the Eastern Caribbean. No country had their own airline in the Eastern Caribbean, at least not commercial airlines like we did in the Bahamas and Jamaica did, right? Barbados didn't, Trinidad didn't, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, and straight along the chain, right? Even the French-speaking ones, like Guadeloupe and what the next one named there, and they all shared Liat. Liat was that regional airline, and I think they had one or two more. But we don't talk too much about all of that. All I'm saying is, the Bahamas was one of the top countries, and if all the rest of the top countries already have a Coast Guard or Defense Force or whatever they had, why should the leader of the Bahamas not see it fitting for the Bahamas to also have a Coast Guard or Defense Force, however we want to label it, right? I think the proper name would have been a Coast Guard, because that's really what we set out to be, a Coast Guard, because we have islands scattered all over the place for miles and miles and miles, hundreds of miles. So why would we call it a defense force? I don't know. We ain't defending from nobody. We're basically guarding our coast. And while Jamaica has a defense force where they have infantry and army and tanks and this type of thing, because they more designed to keep the peace on land by military means, they assist the police force in doing that. They have a larger number in their land-based part of their defense force than they have in their Coast Guard, because they only got one Coast Guard. They only got one rock. So our Coast Guard, or our defense force, as we call it, would have a lot more ships than they would have. We would have a lot more grounds to cover than they would have in Jamaica. We'd have a lot than any of those countries we talk about. Trinidad is only 2 pieces of rock. Barbados is 1 piece of rock. So their little defense force can't really compare with ours. But But while they're not the same in size, are they the same in substance? Like we talk about the best little navy in the world. Are they among the best navies? Are we among the best navies? Are we better than them? Are they better than us? And sad to say. I think that we fall way behind when it comes to being the best little navy, even in the Caribbean. That's what I think, and I got plenty backing up on that. And I don't know how much time we could be allowed to go on with the show tonight, but we can go on until they stop us. I can tell you that, right? Let me start by saying, so Lyndon Pillin brought in this commander. I think he was either a lieutenant commander or a commander from the Royal Navy on loan. Paid the Royal Navy a whole heap of money for him to be here. We put him in Morro Castle. We got a place for him to stay. We give him a vehicle. We give him security who were actual Defense Force officers or Defense Force ratings at the time. And we got him nice and set up and everything was good and cozy. And he really put things together to get this force started, right? Because now, we could have bring in people from Barbados and Jamaica like we did when we got our police force going, but we still had some British people there who would have had more experience in this type of thing and yada yada yada, right? So we brought in Commander Swinley, and he was instrumental in starting a defense force. But when he came in, there was an existing entity known as the Police Marines. Now what happened was, back in, I think it would have been 74, 75, the police decided to get a unit to guard our waters, because we knew that our waters was been, I wouldn't say overtaken, but it's been deeply exploited by fishermen from neighboring countries. And then we found out afterwards that they were exploiting us by running drugs all over the place. Right? And then we always knew that we were being exploited by the sloops bringing in migrating, bringing in migrants, right? And so we needed to do something. So it was decided that the police force will start a marine division where they got 4 60-foot patrol boats. They had no navigators, so they brought in civilian navigators. And then eventually some of these civilian navigators would have started to teach or train some of the police, senior personnel, how to navigate. Right? And most of the people they brought in to navigate those 60-footers at the time were Ragged Island men. Because back then Ragged Island men knew the seas better than just about every other island navigators. Because you know where Ragged Island is. Come on, man. They worked their way from Ragged Island to Nassau and around other parts of the Bahamas. And they knew how to navigate sailboats. Because we didn't used to have no boat with no engine back then. So when the police got these boats with these big-time engines, they were fast compared to other boats. They were faster than all the mail boats. And the Ragged Island captains were brought in to navigate them. That form the corps, because they give these guys ranks, eh? Because you are going to be navigating this boat, you may not be the captain, or you may be the captain, but you're really navigating this boat for the police, qualified police who know about police work, who could actually pull boats down, and they have the authority. And so what they did eventually is made some of these captains top-ranking and official policemen Although they didn't, I don't think they went through the proper training or through the formal training to become a police officer, because they came in at an age beyond the 26 years or whatever years they used to bring you in as a recruit. So they were more like direct entries, eh? And they came in and they navigated these vessels. And they became policemen, senior policemen, and they just went on their merry way. And the Defense Force came around. Swinley came around. And let me tell you something about those British officers on the Defense Force. None of them never navigated none of our vessels. They never sailed as officers on board no ship. They were there working in the office. They were there spearheading. They were there who we reported to, although we did the sailing. But they were never brought in here to do no patrolling. They never made no arrests. They never been the captain of none of our vessels, right? And that's from Swinley, Belton, Commander King, Commander Ray, Commander this, Commander that, Commander the next. They had a couple lieutenants and lieutenant commanders and stuff like that. No, and this one and that one, and none of them could have sailed none of our, because I don't think it was ever intended, or I don't even know if it was legal for a non-Bahamian to sail on those vessels as officers attached to those ships. Right? That could have been a problem moving forward if there was a crossfire and one of them got killed and they found out that they were British and I don't know, but I know the reason. All I know is they never ever were on board of it. We had the navigators from Ragged Island, and they trained up the police, marines, and they trained up the Defense Force officers, because I want you to know we started to get some officers early in the day. So the program in the Royal Navy, Mr. Swinley is supposed to take that and adopt it to this new breed called the Defense Force, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. And their program called for officers coming out of high school to have 5 O-levels with C and above, including maths and English. And that's in the British system, because we did the same thing here. We did the British system, yeah? And those officers had to be between the age of 18 and 25 in the Royal Navy. And so that was applied here. We want young men coming out of school, because we want to catch you early. We don't want to catch you when you're over 26, because it's a little hard to mold you then, right? And the first set of officers that the Royal Bahamas would have sent off, and this would have been around 76, 77, would have been persons, and I think all of them was from private schools, eh? Because back then you ain't gonna find much government school graduates. And I'm calling VGHS a private school, because you had to pass a common entrance to go there. You couldn't just go there. It wasn't like how it is today, right? I'm including that with the private school, because we had 1 or 2 of them too, all right? But we had people from, like my good friend Donald Ware came from QC. Peter Drudge came from I think St. Anne's or SAC. And I think Turnquest went to Massey St. John's, or one of them. And then we had Roger Roll that went to St. Andrews, and then we had Godfrey Roll and Anthony Allens. They would have been the first 6 people to go off, right? Now, Anthony would have been the head boy at AFRD, so he would have come in from a government. He would have been the first one, and Godfrey would have been a little older. Now, I don't know if Godfrey went to school in Exuma, or he went to private school in another. Godfrey, call me and let me know where you been, man. Godfrey and I talk all the time, right? Godfrey called the show a couple of times to light me on something. I should have called him earlier today. I wasn't even sure I was bringing the show on like this. But anyway, Godfrey, let me know what's happening. And then after that, you had the people like Jackson Ritchie and a whole heap of people from SAC, like Davy Roll and Harvey Sweeten and who else come from? Well, Anthony Arch and them. These fellas came from SAC. We had a crew people from St. John's, the Tellus Bethels and the James Wallaces and I'm sure it was more, right? So we had a lot of private school interests wanting to go off to Dartmouth. See, because in the first couple years, the officer on the Defense Force never trained in Nassau. You don't know what it is to train to be a military person until you reach England. And I went through that. My group was the very last group that didn't do any type of training in Nassau. We went straight to England, gone to London, and we were very young. I was only 18, right? And we stayed in a hotel for 3-4 nights, and then we caught the train. I knew they give us our instruction packet, so we need to know what to do. Gone to Paddington train station, caught the train down to Totnes or whatever that place name, and then Dartmouth would have had buses bringing everybody from that train station to the college, because that was the closest stop to the college, and everybody coming to join as midshipmen basically were getting off there. So we made our way to Dartmouth, and when you reach Dartmouth, which is Royal Britannia Naval College. This the university, we call it. This the college, because you ain't getting no college degree, right? You ain't getting no associate degree or bachelor's degree. No, you training to be a military officer. This is where the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, this is where King Charles, King Prince Andrew, and just about all the royal family would have trained at Dartmouth, right? Because most of them did do the military side. Some of them I'm trained to be pilots in the Air Force and whatnot, but they would come to Dartmouth to do the officers training, right? So Dartmouth is a very prestigious institute, and so we were all going off to Dartmouth and coming back after a year, and we were then pinned to be the persons to spearhead the running of this new organization, this Bahamas Defense Force. But we met some people there, like the senior policemen who were running the police marines. Because at some point in, I think it was 1980, just before the sinking of the Flamingo, I think it was April, the end of April in 1980, you had to make a decision. Either you could stay a police and remain in the police force, or you can cross over to the defense force, where we'll give you, from your rank of constable or corporal or sergeant or ASP or whatever, we'll give you a defense force rank of the equivalent salary, right? And many of them crossed over, while some of them didn't cross over. And I think that's why people like my friend Don, where he would have known a lot of senior police, because he would have known a lot of them who was part of the police marines, because what they used to do then, defense force officers didn't have any power, because our act was not what you call it, not legislative, but the thing is when you get gazetted, right? It wasn't entered into force until April of 1980. So if you go in the sea prior to that time, only the police on those boats had the power to carry the rest. Yes, we assist them and yada, 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 but we couldn't make, not we, because I was on the force till 1981, but I mean people like Turnquest and Drudge and Donway and Roger Rule and Anthony Adams, those are the people, Jackson Ritchie, those are the people who would have been there before those policemen had to leave or stay, right? And so we had a group now of senior policemen, junior policemen, because most of those who were police would have entered the defense force when the time came as either an able seaman or a leading seaman or a petty officer and all the rest of that, chief petty, depending on what their rank in the police force was and how much seniority they had, right? But they were all, especially the engineers, some of the engineers as well, and they all did well in the defense force, because they were the ones who basically shaped the new entrance into the defense force, with discipline, with the way you do things on these vessels and all the rest of that. Because we didn't have any ratings coming in from the Royal Navy, and I think that was one mistake they made. They should have bought a couple killocks, couple leading hand and POs from the Royal Navy on loan, just like they did with the officers, to properly let us see how they do things in the Royal Navy, right? That didn't happen. And back to the Royal Navy. In the Royal Navy, if you're an officer and you're in Dartmouth, right, and you fail your exams, whether you fail your professionals after the first 6 months or you fail the academics after the full year, you will no longer be an officer of the Royal Navy. You'll be gone back to civvy streets. All that training you do, but if you fail, you out. But they didn't carry that over in the Defense Force. In our Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and this is a very touchy subject for me because I got some of my best friends who went to Dartmouth as midshipmen and didn't pass. Right? Because it was that tough. It wasn't easy. Yes, you got your O levels and all that, but when you in Dartmouth and you didn't do no pre-training in the Bahamas, you didn't know how to slick your shoes, you didn't know how to keep your you didn't know how to march, you didn't know how to go and throw a boat rope because you've never been on a boat before. You don't know nothing but navigation. You are basically somebody going over there to try and learn how to be in the military, and at the same time you got these academics coming at you. You got to learn about celestial navigation, you got to learn about coastal navigation, you got to learn about operations and warfare, you got to learn about engineering, you got to learn about, and these things you never see before. These ain't nothing you did with your O levels. These are new things, and they expect you every day to do an activity. You got to go and play a sport, or you got to go down on the river and drive boating. Boy, let me tell you something. They used to make sure you do something when the evening come. And then when you look, you ain't got time to launch around because you can't study. You better learn when you're in the classroom, or else you get leave behind. And if you fail the exams, it could be another story. If you're Brit, you're out. If you're Bahamian, you're still in, but you're a little embarrassed, right? So we've had, when our force first started up, a mixture of officers who, if they were in the Royal Navy, would have been sent home, and some who, if they were in the Royal Navy, would have become sub-lieutenants. Right? And that's just the way it was. Because somehow the Defense Force decided, even if you fail Dartmouth, we will still commission you as an officer in the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. And that, my friend, is where me, Glenn Beard, think things went wrong. Because now you're telling me that we are a lesser qualified organization than the Royal Navy. You're telling me that we are a lesser qualified organization than the Jamaican Defense Force or the Jamaican Coast Guard. We are less qualified officer corps than the Trinidad and Tobago or the Barbados, because in their system, if you fail, you out. And I think that while I don't think you should be out, I think that you should return home as a senior rate, because now you're getting all this training. You're not that bad. It just ain't good enough to pass, right? But you can still be utilized as a senior rate. You can still be navigating vessels. You just can't be the captain, just like they do in the U.S. Coast Guard. You got one captain and probably another officer, and they don't navigate. You got the chief petty officers navigating those ships. You probably got one chief engineer as an engineer, and the chief petty officers basically running the engine room. Right? So if you go off to be an officer and you don't cut it, then come back and be a senior. Give you the option to be a senior rate or leave the force. Because you signed up to be an officer, you didn't make it, so you could decide, boy, I make that, I ain't be an officer. So, and I could run over this forever, right? But I just think that we need to understand that we are a lesser quality officer corps than most countries. Because most countries, if you fail, you out. I don't know anybody who failed Dartmouth and was put out. Now, we've had some that Dartmouth sent home because they say their character and leadership is not up to standard. And that's another thing you're looking at when you go off to Dartmouth. This CNL thing, you ain't know nothing but these things. You ain't never been in no military. You never. Now, that went on until 1982. Because after we returned, the first set of people that went to Dartmouth, and that was my good friend Alvin Fowler, Adrian Criswell, Roddy Bowe, who was Commodore eventually, and who was with them, boy? One more person. Was it Ralph? I'm not sure, right? But those were the four, yeah, Ralph Sanders, I think it was. May his soul rest in peace. Those were the first 4 officers that went to Dartmouth after being trained as recruits on the Defense Force. So when the training was going on, everybody went blue cover, this went white. Because they were seen as people coming in to be officers. And they would have learned how to slick their shoes. They would have learned how to drill and march and take charge of people. And they would have been on our boats after they passed out as navigators. Because we trained them up. So when they went off to Dartmouth, they had that edge already. It was very difficult for them to fail Dartmouth compared to when we went. We had no preparation. And I really say not to say this or that or next. All I'm saying is that is the way it was, right? And in the U.S. Coast Guard program, you can't even join as a cadet, which means you're going to officer school. Unless, of course, you already have a bachelor's degree. You have to have your first degree, right? And while you in university getting your degree, and you decide, boy, I think I could try the Navy, or I could try the Coast Guard, or I could try the Air Force, or I could try the Army, but I want to be an officer. They have programs in those universities called an ROTC program, which means if you join the ROTC, you can apply for a grant for the Navy to pay your tuition or give you a scholarship toward partial payment of your tuition. But obviously you have to join them once you get through. So when you're talking about officers in the U.S. Armed Forces, they all have a degree. And your degree don't have to be in no specific area. And it's the same thing with the police in Florida and most states. You can't join the police force unless you already have a degree, a college degree. To join the police force in the Bahamas, you need 5 BJCs. And maybe that's why sometimes when we are dealing with policemen as professional people, you're a professional, you're an accountant, you're a professional, you're a doctor, and the policemen don't know how to be professional. You wonder why? Because some of them can't even read and write properly. And I know some of them is my friends, and they can't write a proper report. And those in the police force can tell you a lot of them there. But if you were like the police in the U.S., where you have to have a degree before you even join, and you know what they call them? Deputies. They don't call them constable and sergeant. And no, they deputies. You know why they call them deputies? And I know police, and I don't want no police. Well, if the police want to call and question that's fine with me, right? But they call them deputies simply because they are all trained to be the sheriff. And when you pass out of your training, you already have a college degree, you've been through the academy. When you pass out, you should be able to do everything the sheriff can do on the streets. So they call you deputy sheriff. You have one sheriff, and any other police who you see in uniform is a deputy, because that person is supposed to be able to do things just as good as the sheriff. Because that person is a person with a college degree. because that person is a person who have been trained professionalism. And when you see somebody driving a Coast Guard ship or serving as an officer on a Coast Guard ship, that person had to get a degree before they even get in the program. So we know we're dealing with qualified people. That they have a standard that they start with. So why we in the Bahamas Defense Force couldn't have a standard where we know that if you're wearing a lieutenant bar or sub-lieutenant bar, you pass that much. You didn't just pass round that much. You pass that much. And that's what we really had in the first couple of years of the Defense Force, because we had so much smart people, all these people from all these private schools. We were having, most of them were passing. And then eventually they started doing that, because what they were doing, what Mr. Swinley did, is he came to Arambili. He went to C.C. Sweeting. He went to other schools, right? Government schools and private schools. And he said, we are looking for you. All we need you to do is get your O-levels, 5 O-levels to C and above, including maths and English, and we will send you. We ain't going to ask you if you want to go. So that was the incentive. But after the Defense Force became Bahamianized, I think it was 1983, the Commodore wasn't going around to those schools no more to try and find people to send to Dartmouth. As a matter of fact, things changed so drastically that the program they had that they call you come in as a recruit. But if you're an officer, you come in as a cadet. And you wear white coverall, and you basically going to be a midshipman until you go off to Dartmouth. They scrap that. And then they start focusing on, you're already in the force, we can see who we can send to Dartmouth from within. So we're no longer soliciting the bright minds from high school to come in there at an early age, and then the SD program kick in. You know what is SD? Self, what do you call it? One of y'all call me, man. I know all of y'all listening. Y'all might be a little shy. Call me and tell the people what SD means. Self something, right? That means you're in the force. You're a senior rate. You've reached the stage of either petty officer, chief petty officer, or force chief petty officer. So you pass that threshold where you're no longer a junior rate. You're now a senior rate. And as a senior rate, we could send you off to Dartmouth to do a reduced time. You don't go on the Dartmouth training ship. You don't do navigation and all those stuff, right? We don't know you good enough in your area. Special duties, right? SD, special duty. So we want you to specialize. Just do your special duty. You could be in one area of the Defense Force when you come back, right? And in the Royal Navy, they use them in specific areas that they good in. That's why they call them special duties. And they make them lieutenants. And they make them lieutenant commanders. But you never have in the Royal Navy a special duty officer getting a rank higher than lieutenant commander. You'll never have a special duty officer wearing 3 bars with scrambled egg. But we didn't apply that in the Defense Force. Because the people who was in charge at the time, I don't even think they understood or they cared anything about it. So the SD officers came in, and the SD officers came back as sub-lieutenants. They didn't come back as acting sub-lieutenants like the midshipmen who did more time and had more qualification coming out of high school. They came back because some of them just barely able to pass, get their maths O level and their English O level, and they only had 5, they only had 2, but that was good enough for SD. And when they came back, they moved to the rank like hot knife running through butter, soft butter, right? Because some of them were the same rank as me, who went the full length to be an officer, the proper, all the rest of that, and they came in as SDs. And they were promoted to lieutenant commanders and command. And you even had SD officer was commodore of the Defense Force. Will you talk that? And I have nothing against the man. I like, me and him was very good friends. Still very good friends. But, if he's in Royal Navy, he would never see anything higher than Lieutenant Commander. Because they have standards where they know we got to go into the schools and get the young, smart minds. And this is one of the reasons why the Defense Force didn't have engineering officers go off to Dartmouth as an engineering officer. And then come back and serve on ships as the chief engineer. We still haven't achieved that yet. Right? Because we don't see engineering as that important in the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. That's the reason why when the boat becomes 5-6 years old, it start having all kind of issues. We got a sideline it before 10 years old. Only in the Royal Bahamas Defense Force that foolishness happens. Because of the slackness and the lack of attention to the engineering requirement. In the real world, their ships don't break down when they're 10 years old. Ships is sidelined because the lack of maintenance or the lack of professional service in the engine spaces. Because if you serve on a ship as a chief engineer, you could be very well qualified before you get that job. You have to go through all kind of systems and exams and trainings to become an engineer officer in the real world. You know what you're doing when you go in that engine room. You ain't gonna go do your course, fail it, and still be an engineer and officer in an engine room in the real world. You ain't gonna do it in the Royal Navy either. You ain't gonna do it in the Coast Guard either. Only in the Royal Bar. What's supposed to be our best little Navy. And then I remember while I was at Dartmouth, boy, I could tell you all the business, right? See, I could talk with this now because this done, I don't live this. And I don't care if y'all don't call. I know some of y'all tempted to call, and we have to come finish this next week because you see we don't just about run out of time, right? But they had some people join the Navy that when the merchant Navy, in other words, this guy, I remember, he was a master mariner. In other words, he served on board international ships as a captain before he was 26. So he came and he joined as a midshipman. But because he was already a master mariner and he could take any ship anywhere in the world, they brought him in as a direct entry and made him a lieutenant. So while all of us was wearing our midshipman patch, this brother was wearing 2 bars. He was a lieutenant while he was in training. Believe that? And then they had some who would have gone to college and they would have gotten an associate degree. Plus they had the 5 O-levels 15 above. And when they come in, they say, well, since you already been to college and you had an associate degree, while everybody else is midshipman, you'll be a sub-lieutenant wearing your blue training uniform. So we had sub-lieutenants and lieutenants who were in training with us. We didn't have to salute them or none because they were recruits. But they were already wearing the rank because of what they already achieved. And you know what we used to call them? Anyway, my time doesn't but go on. We used to call them plastic lieutenants, plastic sub-lieutenants, plastic officers. Because as far as we're concerned, man, you only get that rank because you have this same qualification, but you ain't wait for that. So we used to call them plastics. And so when you see an ST officer in the Defense Force wearing a commander or senior commander or captain, that's a plastic officer. Because he was not supposed to get beyond lieutenant commander. And when you see, boy, I know you all want to call, when you see an officer, we only got 2 minutes left. Oh yeah. Yes, Mr. Producer, I can close it right now. We can pick this up next week, right? When you see an officer in the Royal Bahamas Defense Force wearing all kind of stripes, But he went to... So he went to Dartmouth, didn't pass, came back, and was still acting sub-lieutenant after a while. And then he got sub-lieutenant, lieutenant. That's a plastic officer because he ain't never passed the officer training. And some of them is my best friends, and I don't care. It is what it is. We should have never done it. And that, my friend, is part of the reason why the Defense Force today is not what it was set out to be, or what it should have been set out in the eyes of Captain Glenn Bain. And if you all think I'm wrong, call me and let's discuss it. So that wraps up our show today. You see, we fresh out of time. We'll come back and finish this up next week because we really ain't get to the crux of this yet, right? We got plenty more talking to do. Ladies and gentlemen, you may see a little hot on the caller, but you know how it go, right? I am Captain Glenn Bain. You are listening to Maritime Matters. My producer for the night, Mr. Kishno Jones. We got to go to the news. So while I playing around with this 1 minute, let me just tell you, thank you for listening. And Maritime Matters, tick, 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 tick. Out.
I'll be sitting in the evening calm, watching the ships roll in. Then I'll watch them roll away. Watching the tide roll away, sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. I left my home in Georgia, headed for the Frisco Bay. I've had nothing to live for, look like nothing's gonna come my way, so I'm just gonna say